Everyone dreams of leading high-performing teams, and also everyone dreams of working in a high-performing team. Only 10% of all teams are actually high-performing. That's varying, right? When you start a new job, you do have a once-in-a-time opportunity that you won't have after 3, 4, 6, 9 months. It's usually the one that is the loudest in the room that suddenly gets capacity from the team. If we're aligned better, our teams are aligned better, and we can unblock a lot of capacity. I prioritize speed over perfection. EMs just spend 80% of their time filling in templates and reading frameworks, and 20% coping with their team's challenges. And I feel like there is a massive strategy execution gap. We too often treat product strategy in isolation.
A phrase I really like that you've said is to have a mindset that there are at least 10 other ways to achieve our goal that we haven't tried yet.
I can't stop thinking about solutions until I solve the problem, if it is a problem that I really deeply care about. If someone's telling you we tried it, it didn't work, don't stop there. Think about 10 different ways. There must be something in your product that is so appealing to that one segment of users that if you just double down a little bit, you can actually grow your business.
Everything I read on LinkedIn is repeating how I've learned PM for over a decade now.
Just because you've done something for 10 years exactly the same way, it doesn't mean we have to do it over and over again. We can question how we deliver things.
Hello everyone, I'm really excited about today's episode with Stephanie Leue. Stephanie, thanks for being here.
Thanks for having me. I'm super excited as well.
So I was telling Stephanie before this that it's a bit of a fan moment for me because I have been reading her content for years. So if you haven't seen her speaking at a conference, I saw her at the Product Board conference a couple years back, or writing on LinkedIn. Stephanie is a very long tenured PM and PM voice. Currently, she's a group product manager at Ringier. I might have mispronounced that. But before that, she was also the CPO at Doodle. And she has a 15 plus year career in product at places like PayPal and Contentful. So that makes me super excited about today's episode, not just because she's one of my favorite follows, but she has a lot of experience. And most importantly, her opinions actually tend to be original. In this PM content space where you read so much, she has a lot of against the grain thoughts. So without further ado, let's get into it. So our first topic of the day, and where I want to start, is how do we build high-performing teams as product leaders and also product managers, because every product manager is a leader in some way. So can you define for us what really is a high-performing product team?
Absolutely. I think everyone dreams of leading high-performing teams, and also everyone dreams of working in a high-performing team, because we have that potentially unrealistic idea of how it is to work or lead a high-performing team. And one book that I absolutely love since a couple of years is Patrick Lencioni's 5 Dysfunctions of a Team. And from my perspective, he remains the one person that has the most accurate depiction of what a team should avoid in order to be a low-performing team or in order to become a high-performing team. And it's the 5 dimensions of absence of trust, fear of conflict, lack of commitment, avoidance of accountability, and inattention of results. That's the counterintuitive thing towards a high-performing team. And if you kind of check all of these five criteria, you are rather a low-performing team. So everything you do in order to become the opposite of these 5 criteria makes you already kind of a high-performing team. And to me, to be honest, I had the honor to work once in a really, really high-performing team. And I think as a team member, you figure out that you're in a high-performing team when you wake up on a Monday morning and everything you want to do is you want to go back to work and you want to continue working on your initiatives, right? And you think about your colleagues and you're really excited. I think that's the best signal of the moment where you found your own high-performing team. But I think it is also super important to be aware that the high-performing team itself is kind of a miracle. There is no team that is always constantly high-performing. It just doesn't exist. It would be super irrational to have a team that is really just overperforming all over the time. Every team, like every human as well, has ups and downs, right? And I think this is something that you need to keep in mind, that if you're speaking about high-performing teams, it's not a constant thing. It is something that potentially a team shows more often than others. So they tend to be more high-performing than others on average over a period of time.
Is your product team having trouble in capturing the true voice of customers? That's because user feedback is scattered across channels, making it nearly impossible to catch crucial conversations. It's time you're able to centralize your voice of customer from everything like your CRM, customer portals, call recordings, or even public reviews. That's where Zeta.io comes in, our podcast partner today. With Zeta's AI, you can plug your customer conversations in, and it will allow you to easily slice and dice these into actionable insights for your key product areas so that you can do more to improve NPS scores, analyze features, identify new features, or perhaps understand why you lost a few deals. This paves the way for planning the right features and channeling your efforts into actually planning and building your roadmap to finally close that loop 10 times faster. Product managers around the world use Zeta.io and use it to really improve their product discovery. It's plug and play in just minutes. So visit zeta.io/LPS/AkashGupta to get an extra 10% off. This episode is brought to you by Interpret. Interpret unifies all your customer interactions, from Gong calls to Zendesk tickets to Twitter threads and App Store reviews, making them available for comprehensive analysis. As we've profiled in the newsletter, it's the trusted choice of product organizations like Canva, Notion, and Descript. They rely on Interpret to drive forward their voice of customer programs. What makes Interpret special is its ability to, 1, build customer-specific AI models that provide more accurate categorization. 2, connect customer feedback directly to revenue impact so you can prioritize confidently. And 3, uncover insights with their Wisdom AI Copilot so you have an intuitive chat interface to access your data. So if you want a custom model built for your organization, get in touch with the team at interpret.com/productgrowth. That's ENTERPRET.com/productgrowth.
So what's noticeably absent from that definition is product managers are empowered, your roadmap is now next to later, that you're doing discovery on every feature, that you don't build features based on stakeholder requests. You didn't define kind of what most people put in the bucket of high-performing product teams. So why aren't those elements of the definition?
Yeah, and that's shocking, especially for someone like me, because I'm a super process-oriented person. I love processes. Processes give clarity to teams. They help teams to align. They help teams to have shared understanding of how to work with each other. So I'm a super big fan of processes until I worked at Contentful. And at Contentful, we had one like super high performing team where everyone at Contentful wanted to be part of. And what was different within that team is that they had no rules and no processes at all, but they were still high performing because there was no ego and there was no kind of finger pointing, nor did they had the necessity to define clear roles and responsibilities because they were aligned on one shared goal. And because they were aligned on one shared goal and they also had a very healthy way of managing their conflicts, there was no like, you did that and you did this and like, that's your role and that's my role. It was rather like, that's our goal as a team. And if I'm the product manager and I'm great in like leading meetings, then I'm leading meetings. If I'm an engineering manager and I'm great in writing tickets, then I'm writing tickets. It was not about like who does what per definition, but it was like, how can we achieve that goal together? And to me, that was a really eye-opening moment, because if you work in such a team or if you see such a team performing, then everything that you thought about has to be in place is suddenly questioned. And you still see that this team is high performing. And that was quite cool.
That's awesome. It strikes me that a lot of these descriptions are almost softer descriptions. A lot of these have to do with how the team is functioning, how people are feeling, how responsibilities are fluid. Is it fair to say that these people aspects, almost these EQ aspects, play a bigger role in whether a team is high performing than what processes or what sort of IQ aspects they're reliant on?
Well, I think we need to distinguish the internal perspective of a team and the external perspective. If I work in an organization that has no clear goals, that has bad leadership or no leadership at all, that is in a challenging situation, or that is not fostering a great culture, then obviously, like, getting teams to a high performing state is almost impossible because the surroundings are just not made up for high performing teams, right? But let's assume you work in an environment, and Contentful back then has been such an environment for me, where everything was in place. Everyone was addicted to the product. We were all moving towards the same objectives. We had like really great values. We had really great leadership. So the basics, the hygiene factors were kind of set in stone, and like we haven't had any challenges with that. In such an environment, thriving as a team definitely is more of an EQ thing, because everything is kind of set in stone. So you do have an idea of like where to head, where towards, and how to work with each other. And then becoming high performing is much easier, especially if you get the right people in the room together. Yes.
Got it. So if the basic structure of the strategy, the North Star, the roles and responsibilities aren't in place, then you have to fix those. Those are kind of like lower on the Maslow's hierarchy of needs.
Yeah, absolutely.
Makes sense. So if you were to put some high level numbers around how many teams are failing on these points, these low levels of Maslow hierarchy's needs versus higher levels, what would you put it at? Like, what is sort of, and I know you mentioned these are rolling hills, so it may not be consistent, but if we were to just take a slice in a point of time and look at all the product teams that you've looked at, because you've looked at so many, how would you say, like, how many of them are suffering from these various ailments?
Yeah, I wrote a master thesis on that topic, and the number stated in the books was that only 10% of all teams are actually high performing. That's worrying, right? But to be honest, like looking back in my past 16 years, I think I can confirm that. Like, I didn't really work in too many really high performing teams compared to the times I had at Contentful, but also at PayPal. We had times where we really were high performing. My team at Doodle was really high performing at times. Like I experienced it, but I'd say in product, it's maybe 80% because we do have a different setup. We're not in a traditional industry. We rather develop towards more autonomous teams. So the likelihood of working in an autonomous team and having more freedom also helps teams to become more high performing than others in other surroundings, actually. So I'd still say maybe 80% of all teams struggle to perform at their peak constantly.
Makes sense. And even if you're on a high performing team, what do those rolling hills look like? Like, how often should I expect that things are rosy and I'm waking up and enjoying work?
Yeah, well, that's a personal thing on the one hand, right? But I mean, also in high performing teams, there's change. People leaving, people being out sick, people going on maternity leave, people suffering health issues, or the leader is changing, or strategy is changing. So there are external things happening which are out of your control that affect your team setup. And then I think you're, as a high performing team, going through the standard phases of like storming, norming, performing that we know from other teams as well. But I would argue that high performing teams went through these phases much faster because they do have a healthy culture within their team. So they also overcome challenges, changes, and conflicts much faster than non-high performing teams.
Makes sense. I love that framework you just mentioned. And I can guess from the names what those are all about, storming, norming, and performing. But can you maybe walk us through one layer deeper on that?
Yeah, absolutely. I need to check who came up with that framework. So I'm super bad at remembering names. But actually what the framework is all about is that it says that every team no matter whether it's a new team or whether it's an existing team, goes through 3 or 4 different phases. The three phases that I usually refer to are the storming phase, like a team gets to know each other, they start working with each other, everyone tries to find their space in that team, like who am I, what's my role, how do I relate to others. So they really need to figure out like what's my identity within the team, but also what's my team's identity. And once they found this team identity and once they sorted out the basics like ways of working or principles, for example, they rather enter a norming phase. And in that phase, you will see a decrease in conflicts, for example. And you will see that the team starts collaborating better and that the team also starts collaborating better with people outside of their team. And then the next phase is the high performance phase, where teams are like so well connected with each other that they are just performing on a high, as if you're married for quite a long time and you don't have to speak to your partner any longer because you know exactly what it means when she raises her eyebrows, right? Like you don't need to speak about like what's going on because you know exactly what it is. I think that's when you're on a high performance.
That makes me think about some scenarios this weekend with my wife. Oh, happy birthday. We had a great birthday weekend. So now I want to move into what you tactically do with this information as a product leader, and especially as a product leader moving into a new job, because I think that's when a lot of people, this comes top of mind. And one of the frameworks I've heard you reference in a couple past interviews is the 4 Ps: people, processes, purpose, and performance. I believe this is how you recommend evaluating teams. And I think this is similar to what you did when you joined Doodle, of creating an assessment of what should change when you start a job. So can you kind of give us a full deep dive on how this framework works and how we should be implementing it?
Absolutely. I mean, first, the credit to this framework goes to rather like people like Peter Drucker or like Deming or Michael Porter. It's not new, nor did I invent it. It's just something that I adopted, again, at Contentful, by the way, back then, and since then fine-tuned, because I figured out that when you start a new job, you do have a once-in-a-time opportunity that you won't have after 3, 4, 6, 9 months, actually. And what it's all about is that I strongly believe that if you look into these 4 dimensions as a leader, you will have an opportunity to also understand what are the biggest areas and the biggest challenges within my team or within the organization that I should prioritize first in my new role. Because what we all want to do is we want to deliver value. And then there's the 30, 60, 90-day onboarding plan. And we're always recommended to like be silent, like don't try to change things, and like, right. But I can't. It's like if you're hired as a leader, you also want to prove your value. This framework for me is super simple to prove value without even changing everything in the organization. And as you said, it's about people. People in my world always come first. And people is all about the leadership teams, the team dynamics, about roles, about responsibilities. And I figured out that if teams have no clue about their ways of working, if they can't describe how they collaborate with each other, if they have too many dependencies on other teams, if they can't clearly articulate the other people's responsibilities in their team, then usually this is a very weak pillar. And that is something that you need to fix fast, because if people can't work with each other, how do you want to get them to high performance? It's impossible. Purpose is the next pillar, and we talked about it earlier also. It's like if there is no purpose within the company, no company vision, no company strategy, no product strategy, whatever it is, even if it's not a full-fledged strategy, but if there is nothing that people can share and align on in order to understand how do we move towards something that we as a company want to achieve, then how do you want people to be on a high performance? It's, again, impossible, because then everyone goes in every direction based on their very limited insights, and it's super hard to align everyone towards a common goal. Process is the thing that I said earlier that I'm super passionate about, but also figured out that process has its limitations. And process is everything about, and maybe it's a simple question that I ask, Can you describe how you release products from idea to inception, actually, or even from idea to value? And usually in most companies, when I start a new role, I get 50 different stories of how products go from idea to release or even from idea to value generation. But if 50 people tell me 50 different stories of how we build products, how do you want to make sure that you build products super fast and efficient, right? Like that's kind of a gamble and it doesn't really make sense. There is a flavor to it. Mature teams need less processes than immature teams. If a team is really suffering in people, in purpose, in performance, then usually also their processes are super weak, and starting there helps unblock teams. If a team has a high maturity, they do have a great purpose, they do have clear roles. Potentially process is something that you can fine-tune a little bit, but it doesn't need much investment. And if all of the three factors are in place, if you have clear roles, the right people in the right roles, good collaboration, good team dynamics, a purpose, and like more or less well-established processes, then as a leader, I can expect my teams to high perform. If I don't care about the other three pillars, then I can't expect anyone to be on a high performance because I didn't really create the surroundings for my teams to thrive. And I think that's working quite well in my experience.
Awesome. So tactically, how do you implement this? It sounds like when you mentioned like talking to 50 people, that it's almost like an internal discovery process that you conduct via interviews. You maybe even tell them a little bit about, this is what I'm doing. I'm going to cover these topics. And then you come back with like, what is your preferred way? Like a document or a slideshow? And are you sharing that with just the execs, for instance, because it might have sensitive information about how people are performing, for instance, or do you go out and share that with the broader team?
Yeah. So you're right. I put on my researcher hat when I started in a new company, and that's awesome because usually since you got hired, people give you some kind of trust in advance already. So they usually open up. And that's a fair advantage in that case. And then you ask whether I'm using a like clear process or like interview questions. I did when I started. I had a very well lined up interview questionnaire and I went to every single person and I went through the questions. But I figured out that this is quite unnatural. Like I want to get to know people and I want to foster good communication. So usually I do have an idea of what is people, purpose, process, and performance all about. And then I just ask people questions based on their specific role and based on the situation we're in. And it's rather a casual conversation than it is a like very well-structured questionnaire. The advantage is that people open up and that I hear a lot about their specific challenges and their specific roles. And I do not only speak to product people, I also speak to sales and CX and leadership. And I explain them why I'm doing it. I tell them about the 4 pillars I'm looking into. I explain them that I try to evaluate where the organization is. And then usually I never faced any challenges. People want to talk about these things because they want to improve their organizational setup and they want to improve their ways of working. And then I take notes, I summarize my things, and I do have a 5-star rating system. So I ask in the end of the interview, every person, can you rate on a scale from 1 to 10 compared to your personal ideal state? Where are we with people, purpose, process, and performance? And then people rate. And then I do have an average rating. I do have my own rating based on my observations. And then I share this usually on a Miro board with everyone in the organization because I think that's super special about me. I barely hide anything in front of anyone unless it's really super sensitive and I'm asked to not share it. But usually I share everything I do have in progress so that it is accessible. There's nothing to hide. It's about the organization anyways. And then I present things on a 1 or 2 slide presentation. Like here's the state the organization is in, and it's just like 1 sentence plus the stars. Then it's a slide with the future state that I think we can achieve in the next 12 months. And it doesn't need to be 4 or 5 stars. It can be 3. That's fine as well. And then maybe there's a 3rd slide with the 5 key priorities I would want to tackle in the next 6 to 8 weeks. And then usually I get a lot of buy-in into this.
That's awesome. And you're doing it totally open, which I don't think is how the average executive does it. At least in my experience, having hired a variety of directors and senior directors too in my career, usually there's kind of a version that just I get, which is like, XY person is low performing, needs to be managed out, etc. But you're doing it totally open. Can you tell us more about that?
It's not about people. I'm not evaluating individuals, and I can't, right? Like people self-rate how they work with each other. And I think that's pretty much like an employee NPS survey that in good startups is usually, anyways, part of their culture. And I think I'm not sure if that would work in an enterprise, for example, but I'm rather referring to my experience in small to medium-sized businesses. And there, I think it is quite common to also be more or less frank about what's going on, what's going wrong, what's going well. And since I'm not the one who evaluates it or like finger points at someone, but rather says like, look, that's what I heard, that's what I observed. That's not my opinion, but it's my observation. And here's what I would do. No one feels attacked about this because I try to stay as neutral as possible, and I can because I'm the newbie in the room. So how can I have an opinion if I didn't really work with anyone in the room?
Yeah, I love that approach. I feel like it's just taking the high road as a leader a little bit and being
True.
honest that, I'm still new, maybe I'm 90 days in, but I'm not going to immediately issue a verdict on somebody individual's performance.
Exactly.
Okay. And zooming out to your broader leadership career, a lot of product leaders that I have talked to day in, day out, they understand, the product processes that we referenced earlier that generally lead to better outcomes. Like the one I hear most often is having a clear product strategy, because a lot of teams, they're still just hodgepodge assembling lists of features that executives and stakeholders want, and then using the leftover 30% to drive some strategic goals. So most product leaders I talk to, they're trying to empower teams to build more towards a strategy. So I'm curious for those folks, when you're having those conversations, I'm sure you do too, what are your main advice for them?
So what you mean is there is no real strategy, but they want to empower their teams to still work towards a shared goal? Or did I get
think
that
it's
right?
like all the stuff getting in the way of strategy, right? They may have written down a good strategy. I know I personally face this. I wrote down what I think is a pretty good strategy. We've done good discovery work. We've done good design sprints, but then all of the stuff gets in the way. Our biggest customers needs change, and
Yeah.
our platform isn't supporting the new level of scale, and our sales executive has turned over, and the new sales executive has different priorities. So all these
Got
things
it.
tend to get in the way. So I'm
Yeah.
curious, how you deal with that.
Absolutely. Yeah, I love that question. And I recently posted on LinkedIn about the iceberg and exactly tackling that challenge, because you do have that perfectly crafted product strategy. It has 3 pillars. You defined how to measure it. You've done your homework. Like it feels like you're done and now everyone is aligned and they can just go off and deliver, right? And then they don't. And suddenly you're the one in the exec room who gets all the questions, like, didn't you promise to? And like, why don't you? And like, where are we? And like, numbers are still not increasing. What's going wrong, right? Like, so you are under constant pressure. And I feel like there is a massive strategy execution gap. The one where you do have that strategy lined up pretty well, and then there is reality. One of the challenges that I figured out at Doodle, but also in previous roles, is that we too often treat product strategy in isolation. It's great to have a product strategy. And actually also the other teams in the organization love the product strategy. If you share it in an all hands and your presentations and a beautiful product vision type, right? Everyone claps their hand and they're like, yeah, that's what we want to do. But then they can't commit to it because they do have their own strategies. Sales has a strategy. Marketing has a strategy. Even people operations has a strategy. Your CEO has an overarching strategy. And what I face is that usually no one is really fully aligned on what is the one company strategy and how do my product pillars and strategic pillars align with the overall product strategy. I might have written it down, but then I don't feel accountable, or I'm not in a position to hold others accountable. And one of the things that I have done that worked really well, and I also introduced it in a few other companies meanwhile, is a product portfolio management. Or let me rephrase it. The thing that I introduced in other companies is a company portfolio management tool. Because in the end, everyone has initiatives. Sales is working on something, and sometimes sales initiatives require product. Marketing is working on initiatives, and sometimes they suddenly need engineering support. But how do we know that the one thing that product is working on right now is more or less important than the marketing initiative? So it's usually the one that is the loudest in the room that suddenly gets capacity from the team, and you have to put your own initiatives on hold. And surprise, surprise, you lag with product execution, right? But if you do have one shared portfolio, and if you have like 3 or 4 company pillars that everyone is aligned on, what you can do is you can introduce a portfolio management where all initiatives are listed. You can have a shared prioritization framework. I usually recommend cost of delay framework because it is the one that works best for sales teams, marketing teams, and product teams. And then you can prioritize whether marketing initiatives are more important than compliance initiatives, or if compliance is more important than your latest innovation initiative. And that's something that really, really unblocked teams, because it was suddenly super clear what are the 3 or 4 pillars on a company level. Why is my initiative less important than your initiative? And it also fostered really good discussions between teams, so that you have not only had discussions within the product team, but really on a company level, reach broad alignment on who is working on what and why.
And how do you interface, or how do you introduce this as a leader? Because some people might say, well, my CEO should be doing that and handling these cross-functional priorities.
They should, sure, but often they don't. Because what I experienced is that CEOs are either sales leaders, or they are first-time founders, or they have a background that is potentially, it's not their super skill to organize things because they are maybe more visionary. So yes, in their role they should, but if they don't, like, what's holding you back to talk to your CEO or leader and ask, like, look, there is a system. I can show you how I would introduce it. Here's the advantages. Do we want to give it a try? And setting up such a system isn't a big deal. You can start super easy by just collecting all the up and running initiatives and potentially the initiatives that teams already know are coming soon. And then you have at least a good overview of everything that's ongoing and potentially coming in the next weeks across the organization. And then you start introducing a cost of delay framework or whatever prioritization framework. It doesn't really matter. At least you do have something that everyone can align on, that this is how we want to prioritize things. So you introduce that on top, and you can usually do that in a week. It's not a big deal. You can have a table in Airtable or Google Docs, or it doesn't matter. And then you can show that to your CEO and to your leadership team and tell them, like, look, this is what I suggest. This is how we can get more transparency into our ways of working. This is how we as a leadership team can align better. If we're aligned better, our teams are aligned better, and we can unblock a lot of capacity. I didn't experience a single time that any CEO was pushing that back, because the value of you as a leader doing that work for them is super high. And the investment is super low, because you need no tools and you need no more than 1 to 2 weeks in order to get a very first glimpse of what's going on in my organization. And I think that's super valuable for everyone.
I love that. That for me was always kind of the distinguishing factor between really good product leaders and great ones, where the great ones, they're making a pretty big impact outside of product as well. They're coming up with these processes. I saw at Apollo, our CPO, Sheikh Viswanathan, he partnered with our VP of BizOps to make this process you just mentioned happen. So he helped kind of shepherd this idea. And then although BizOps executed, he really helped all of us see these various initiatives and understand, okay, these marketing ones, they're really important, even vis-a-vis the product ones. So I love that. One of the things you mentioned in there was The framework doesn't necessarily matter, but the term still caught my eye and I want to hear more, which is cost of delay framework. Can you help us understand that?
Absolutely. The cost of delay framework is similar to ICE score. It has a few categories like risk or impact or effort. It's nothing else than all the other frameworks, whether it's RISE or ICE, it doesn't really matter. The one thing that I liked about cost of delay is that you can tweak it. I mean, you can tweak every framework, but we tweaked it at Doodle and also introduced a weighting for strategic pillars. And by the way, we have also already done that at Contentful. I think it's quite common, we just don't talk about it. And if you do have a product strategy, or even better, a company strategy, and you do have 2 to 3 clear pillars which you want to address within the next 12 to 18 months, adding a weighting to your impact and effort metrics for these pillars helps you to really bring those things that are most important to the top of the priority list. And I think this is where many frameworks are super short, because they just look into efficiency or risk or effort, but they don't look into strategic relevance, actually. If you add that one perspective to your prioritization framework, then this helps you to really personalize the whole prioritization exercise to the needs of your company. And I think then you can really unblock initiatives and you can make super crucial decisions, because sometimes you want to invest in just very small initiatives that help you to grow in the next 2 to 3 months. Sometimes you want to invest into innovation, and innovation takes 6, 9, 12 months. But how do you make sure that you put enough capacity into innovation if there's so much to do on the feature level? If you put a weighting into your prioritization framework, and COD is one of the things that I experienced most actually, then you can also make such strategic decisions on a company level on long term.
And I think that tactically relates back to my earlier question on how do you create room for your strategy. Maybe you create an explicit weighting for the alignment with that strategy, so you don't end up with the hodgepodge of features.
Exactly. Also helps to align with your CTO, by the way, because there's always the question of tech debt or scalability or replatforming. And that's super hard discussions to have with your CTO. But if you do have 3 or 4 pillars and one of the pillars is scalability, then you can assign a 30% weighting to scalability initiatives. And then scalability initiatives can climb up the prioritization ladder as fast as other strategic pillars can do as well. And I think that helps to also foster good discussions between teams, not only on the long-term and short-term strategy, but also on the foundational questions of like, where is the platform evolving towards? And that's good to have.
Yeah, and you mentioned those conversations are so difficult. I also found those difficult because sometimes that 30% weighting, as a product leader, maybe numbers are getting hard to hit and you want to bring that down to 20 or 15%. But maybe as a CTO, the developer experience is getting worse and worse and the churn is increasing and you want to bring that number up to 35, 40%. How, we all know like the basics, right? Like we want to put forward that as PMs we care about tech debt. We want to create a space for our engineers to have a great experience. But how do you handle those tough conversations? What are your learned lessons there?
I haven't found the perfect solution to that, because actually assigning teams capacity to pillars doesn't make any sense, really. Like that's always rather a retrospective view on how your teams delivered. And it's kind of weird to tell a team that they can spend 30% of their time on fixing bugs. That's kind of weird. Like the goal should be to have no bugs at all, right? At least no critical bugs. So that's a weird discussion to have. And I haven't found the perfect solution yet. As at Contentful, as well as in other companies, we have had assigned at least X% of teams' capacity to fix bugs, for sure. But for the other topics like replatforming or tech debt, that was indeed a strategic pillar in a couple of previous companies, where we said like, we want to invest at least 20% of our time as an organization into tech debt or into evolving the platform. And then actually, if you've had an initiative that had high risk and medium effort and fell into that scalability bucket, then it actually like climbed up towards the top of the list just because it, for example, fixed a high risk. And I think that is a quite neutral way to discuss priorities, because then it's not about, I don't trust you that you really need 40% of my time to deliver scalability initiatives, nor was it I'm more important than you because my initiative is now the one that gets built. But it's like, let's look from a business lens into what is important for us as an organization and what kind of risk do we want to take. A lot of risk, so we fix scalability, or like we don't want to take any risk, so we rather fine-tune and polish some features. That's discussions you need to have. And it's not about assigning times or time buckets to certain initiatives.
Yeah, that's what I found. The time buckets, it's like deceptively attractive because you think like, oh, maybe we've just solved our problem. You can assign it. But in practice, it's much harder to deal with.
You didn't. And also, as I said, you don't solve the underlying issues. Like if you need to assign 30% of your engineering team time to fix bugs, then how do you want to fix that for the future? That's no way. So the question is rather, what needs to happen in order to have zero bugs, or at least zero critical bugs in the future? And then you do have a completely different discussion. And I think these discussions need to happen, the rather strategical discussions, at least on CTO and CPO level.
100%. And one final anecdote I'll share with people, because people may not always hear about this. My brother was a PM at Apple for 4 years, and we all perceive like Apple has like very low bugs and stuff like that. But there was almost a half year of his life where all his team worked on was bugs, because Craig Federighi said, hey, this version of iOS, we have just introduced way too many bugs. Apple is about quality. So I think even those visionary product leaders, sometimes they do put that emphasis on bugs and quality. And like you're saying, how do we get to almost zero critical bugs?
Yeah, and I think that's also easier if you're, for example, in a B2B enterprise space and you only have 40 customers. It's super hard to create 20,000 bugs if you only have 40 customers. But if you have 60 million customers and you're in the B2C space, it's more likely that you will have a bunch of bugs to fix. And so these discussions also differ based on the industry and the vertical you're in. I think that's also important to keep in mind.
Yeah. So rounding out our discussion about product leadership, one of the phrases I've heard you use, and you used in our pre-podcast prep, was a show, don't tell approach. Can you explain that?
I think it's so easy to post all the great things on LinkedIn, for example, or to sit in one-on-ones with my teammates and tell them how I would approach certain things. And I had a situation once where I wanted a team to do more discovery and more customer interviews, but I myself didn't schedule a single customer interview. So how can I ask them to do discovery if I haven't even experienced it myself? And that's just a tiny little example. So if I'm not going out to do interviews, although my schedule is full, but my PM schedule is full as well, how can I expect them to do so? But if I do it, even if I just do it once per week, I figure out why it is so hard for them, right? So I walk in their shoes. That is super important. And you can copy and paste that to a bunch of different areas. If you want your team to be data informed, but you never talk about data, nor do you hold anyone accountable on the data they deliver, or whether the features they delivered hold up to the promises they gave in the very early beginning, then how do you want them to work more with data? So if you want to hold people accountable, you need to show, don't tell. And I think show, don't tell enables you as a leader to walk in your peers or direct reports' shoes. And that also helps you to put a different lens on things and potentially unblock your team much faster than you can as if you're just praying what they should do and how they should work.
I love that. I've been kind of honing in on this as kind of a trend for product leadership. Would you say that's accurate? Which is that compared to, say, 5 or 10 years back, I personally feel like there's more of a burden for us to be doing best in class IC work. And we may only have to do it as 10% of our time, but we kind of need to show the team, like, this is what a best-in-class strategy doc looks like. This is what a best-in-class discovery process looks like. Is that fair?
Absolutely. And I think that's a super good evolution because you can read as many books and do as many trainings as a PM. If no one is holding your hands through the process, you will have hard times becoming a really great PM. So I'm a super big fan of being rather a coach to my team than being the top-down manager. And actually what you say is right. When I started my career 16 years ago, I managed a team of 7. And all I knew from my own experience was the top-down manager, the person that told me what to do and that expected me to deliver. And that was just like sitting in meetings, waiting for updates and waiting for their team to thrive. And it felt horrible to me. I think I was a really, really bad manager at that time because on the one hand, it wasn't me, right? It felt super unnatural. On the other hand, I had no clue on how to do it differently. And then I did a coaching certification myself because I felt like if I understand how to coach people, I also understand how to become a better leader. And it turned out to be true. And through that training, I also learned to be more empathetic and to hold the hand of my direct reports much closer and much more as long as they need me. And not everyone needs you as a leader. Some people are super far in their own journey. But if anyone needs their leader, I think it's super good that we spend at least 10, if not even 50% in coaching our direct reports because it's an upfront investment. I invest 20, 30, 40% of my time in training and coaching my PMs on how I think we should function as an organization. It takes me 6, 9, 12 months to get to a state where everyone is aligned on my ways of working. But after these really, really intense 12 months, the people are so well trained that they usually execute super autonomous and on a super high maturity. And that is also where your organization suddenly becomes much faster in delivering value just because you invested these 10 to 12 months into your team. I think it's crucial.
I love that. So I hope we've established for all the listeners by now that being a great leader as a PM leader means also being great at the craft of product. And so that's where I want to move to next is just the core craft of product. And one of the terms I hear you reference often is this concept of being pragmatic as a product manager. So can you explain that? What are some examples of being pragmatic?
Absolutely. And that's, again, a very personal preference. I hate to overcomplicate things. I hate to waste time. And I prioritize speed over perfection. So that's me. And one thing that I observe is that product just became overly complex. The whole role became overly complex. When I started as a product manager, like at PayPal in 2008, or 2011, my key role was to write PRDs. And then over time, I was supposed to also do research and to create mockups and to do user surveys and to do product marketing. So the role became bigger and bigger and bigger. And that also meant that I had to learn so many new frameworks and I had to learn so many new skills in order to fulfill all the 20,000 things. And I feel like meanwhile, PMs are often getting lost. And if I think about the pragmatic product manager, I feel like that's a person that is really just focusing on the key essence of product that didn't change in the past 16 years. And that's like, you need to understand the market. You need to understand your customers. You need to understand your business model, the business fundamentals, the business numbers. And you usually prioritize hands-on experience and practical decision-making over just acquiring more and more theoretical knowledge. All the discussions on frameworks and like LinkedIn is full of posts with like, look, this beautiful new framework, this template, this XYZ. And that's so super confusing that PMs just spend 80% of their time filling in templates and like reading frameworks and 20% coping with their team's challenges. And then they should invest another 50% in like actually practicing what they read, but they can't because there's no time left. And that's why so many PMs are stretched thin, because that they forget that the basics of the role are super simple, right? We just overcomplicate it sometimes. And I preach to just become a little bit more pragmatic.
Yeah. On the flip side, I'm going to speak up for the content creators for just a second. I think when you don't put a framework, I've done this too, where I'm so anti-framework. So for almost 6 months, like I introduce zero new frameworks, zero new templates. Somehow the content doesn't perform. So is it these content creators, are we playing to the lowest common denominator? Are we playing to kind of those PMs that need the framework? Or is there some value in the framework, but it's all about using the framework maybe as a starter and then going beyond it and applying it? Or what is your thought on that?
Yeah, absolutely. So don't get me wrong, there's nothing wrong about frameworks. And as I said in the beginning, I'm a super process-oriented person. I love clarity. But what I learned is that I do have a set of 5 or 6 frameworks that I'm constantly using. I use them for a bunch of years. And even if there are 10 people introducing me to 20 new frameworks, I look at them, I try to evaluate whether they deliver any additional value to my current toolbox. Sometimes they do, then they potentially get into my toolbox as well, or I exchange a basic template. But I do have my 5, 6 core concepts that I go back over and over again. I fine tune them, I test them, I experiment, I make them my own frameworks. So I usually don't use the frameworks as they were published ones, but I try to make them my own. But I also try to not overcomplicate it by just jumping on the next new framework the week after, because that would drive me nuts and I would always have to unlearn, relearn, experiment again. So I'd rather stick to what I think works good for me as a person in my role, in my specific context.
Agreed. I feel like the value for frameworks is like the 10th, 15th year of implementing it. Like, think back to all the wisdom we just got from Stephanie about 4Ps. A similar one for me is just Michael Porter's 5 Forces. I think when I was introduced to it in college, now like 20 years ago, I was kind of like, this is basic, like, nobody knows what they're talking about. But now that I'm running my own business, like I love using 5 Forces. I'm thinking about, oh, this is supplier power in action. This is buyer power in action. So it kind of took me like that 20th year to really get the juice out of the framework.
Absolutely. That's the crazy thing. We learn all of the theory in university or in courses, and based on a theory, we feel like, yeah, that's nice, but like it doesn't deliver any value to me. And that's what I mean by turning it into hands-on practice, right? If you read about a framework and you're excited, there is a reason why you're excited, but then please don't stop there. Take it, use it. Go into a workshop with your team, try whether it works for your team as well. If it doesn't work, skip it. Go to the next one. You can like really try as many frameworks as you want to, but stop reading. Like just reading. That's like, it drives you nuts. And we won't stop. Creators won't stop. I won't stop sharing and creating frameworks that I think work for me. You have your own set of frameworks and all the other creators have their set of 10, 20 frameworks as well. Like you won't be able to adopt all of them anyways, so try to find the ones that you can stick to.
Love it. A phrase I really like that you've said is to have a mindset that there are at least 10 other ways to achieve our goal that we haven't tried yet. I think that applies to framework, but I want to talk about it more about in the product context. How can you explain that?
A little personal story, and I think my husband will laugh when he listens to that podcast. He always calls me MacGyver for a reason, because I usually, if I really want something, I don't stop, right? And I try 20 different ways, even the craziest ways that no one thinks about. I can't stop thinking about solutions until I solve the problem, if it is a problem that I really deeply care about. And I feel like sometimes, especially if you work longer in a company, people tend to become that, like, we tried this and it didn't work kind of person. I hate it. And I think if you're a newbie and someone says that sentence to you, you do have that energy of like, yeah, but I mean, you're in the company for 10 years, I'm new, let me try a different way. And that's exactly what I mean by that, right? Like everyone, at least I would assume, because I have it, maybe only 50% of people have it, I don't know. But most people have that sense of like, it's good that you tried it, but let me try it again in my way. And I think that's what I mean by it. Like, try to keep that energy of like, if someone's telling you we tried it, it didn't work, don't stop there. Like, think about 10 different ways. if you are the one person that says like to a newbie, and I've done that as well, oh, we tried that. Stop it right away. Tell that person like, I've tried it, but if you try it again based on your experience, tell me how it worked out, right? I think that is a good starting point, actually.
Yeah, or maybe link them to the documents where you wrote up the future results, and they can learn from why yours failed and create a new one. I've seen this happen many times at ThreadUp, for instance. It's not a public company, secondhand clothing company. Outside of the US, people may not have heard of it. But we had this idea that, hey, people would like to put together their outfit. They want to be able to see how the pants and the shirt and the jacket and the scarf come together. So I remember like we had shipped this maybe in like 2011, 2012. Didn't work. Then we had this new engineer. She was an intern, but for her extra project, she just created this on the side in 2014, and boom, conversion rates up. It is now permanently on the site. So I think sometimes you just need that fresh perspective. It's like, even if a feature didn't work, it could have been due to your implementation. Even if a strategy didn't work, it could have been to how you guys did it, or the time you did it, or many other factors.
Absolutely. And I love two things you were saying. Number one is like refer them back to documents that you have written. We're in the age of AI. Put these documents into ChatGPT and ask ChatGPT like for 10 different ideas on how to solve the same challenge. You don't even need to do it yourself, right? That would be one thing. And you said earlier today that, like, didn't you think that the CEO should do it? And I think as humans, we're often in that state of like, oh, but I think the other person should do it. But if I'm caught in that mindset, and the example you just gave, if that engineer would have said like, oh, I'm the newbie, like, shouldn't the others do it because they have a longer tenure, she wouldn't have come up with that idea. So remove that like, shouldn't anyone else do it mindset from your brain, because it's unnecessary. Even if they should do it, there is a reason why they don't do it. So obviously there is space for you to do it. So just do it. Like, the worst thing that can happen is what? I mean, you might get fired but how likely is that?
Please don't do it that way, folks. We don't want you to walk away getting fired from this podcast. But
Fine.
do it in a way that like people are brought along, right? I looked at your guys' implementation of outfits. My hypothesis after talking to 10 people and reading your documents was this. So we want to try this new thing.
Exactly. Yeah. Use all your empathy and your knowledge and your newbie status in order to tell people how you would approach things differently. And I'm sure no one is going to fire you just because you're interested in your organizational development and in bringing ideas forward. I think it's always worth a try.
Yeah. So going into that process now of building products more deeply, the Double Diamond framework, it's probably the most viral product framework really ever. It's in design, it's in product. Everybody knows and understands it. Discovery, delivery, these are terms everybody now understands. You've developed an extended Double Diamond framework. I believe you use this at Contentful. I think you've also shared this on Reforge Artifacts. Can you walk us through that?
Yeah, absolutely. And again, it's one of the frameworks that I steered myself. It originally was developed by the UK Design Council in 2004, and it has been a design framework since ever. And when I worked at Contentful, we were in a situation where we were growing like crazy. And the challenge we were facing was that teams suddenly kind of got lost. They worked so fast and so efficient on things that especially other departments within the organization lost track of, like, where are you? Why didn't you involve me? Why didn't you collaborate? So we needed something that helped teams to gain clarity into what is actually going on in product, because product was a black box. And the agile coach and the design director that I worked with back then talked me through the Double Diamond framework and said, like, that's something we're using. Maybe we can use it for like giving clarity as well. So we brainstormed a little bit and figured out that actually if we add a couple of additional phases, this will help everyone in the organization to give an update of where they are and to also understand whom to involve at which point in time. So what I added during my tenure at Contentful was the discovery phase. We broadened it a little bit. That is part of the original diamond as well. And upfront also a vision and strategy phase, because that is something that is really forgotten very often, to circle back that if you do discovery, it also needs to be aligned with product vision and product strategy. But you're not looking too often into that diamond, because usually strategy happens like every 3, 6, 9, 12 months, right? So it's a diamond that is rather a silent diamond. Discovery is the standard framework. We know all of that. Delivery is the standard framework. We know all of that. But then there is the build and measure diamond, which I added during my time at Contentful, because it is important that there is a glitch happening during the handover from define to build. The engineering department has certain requirements of how the design should look like in order to be ready for implementation. But the design team doesn't feel ready for implementation or for delivering pixel perfect designs yet, because they need more feedback from engineering on how to build it better. And these kind of handover phases happen from every diamond to another. If you create such a framework that has like all of the phases that every team is going through, you can also look into the glitches that are happening in between. And I think this is what makes the framework so powerful. So you do have the vision strategy diamond, the discovery diamond, the define and delivery diamond, the build and measure diamond. What happens is that if you're working with such a framework, you can usually also fairly easy see whom to involve when and how. Because we often forget, for example, to involve data folks. And then what happens? In the very last sprint, the week before you want to release your feature, you suddenly remember that there was this tracking implementation, but you didn't write a ticket. But your data team has no time to pick up the tracking plan, so they can start measuring your feature. How to avoid that? You do have a clear understanding of whether you want to involve data in the define or in the discovery phase or already in the strategy phase. Same applies to CX, sales, marketing. So if you do have an idea of what to deliver when and how, and where the glitches in your product process are, you also have an idea of how to involve people at the right point in time. And that usually just speeds up the entire product delivery.
I love that. So it's really about finding those glitches along these steps in the framework. And how do those conversations typically happen? What level are they happening? How often are they happening? Is it PMs with their tech lead and designer reviewing the quarter? Is it product leaders and one-on-ones with their PMs? How does this tactically go about?
Yeah, what we did at Contentful is we had a super large sheet of paper. Back then we were still all in the office. That was quite long before remote work happened. So we had a super large sheet of paper on the wall, and we drew the diamonds on that sheet of paper. And then we invited CX folks and said, like, look, that's the high level process. What do you think happens where, and what are the biggest challenges you are facing right now, and where do you want us to involve you, and why? And we have done that with sales, with CX, with product marketing, with data, with the CEO, with the leaders, like literally everybody and their dog. And that helped us, again, it was a research project, right? It helped us to understand the different perspective of people. It helped us to listen to the CX folks who were so sad about just learning about feature releases the week before releases, because they had to prepare so many translations and material. And they were always just under stress because we didn't inform them as a product organization about what comes when. So it was quite a lengthy process, I'd say. It took us 3 to 4 weeks to get everyone in front of that sheet of paper. It was a lot of drawing, removing and replacing. But once we had it done, we just kind of did it in a digital version and tried to nail down the key things we want to do in each phase, the key people we want to involve, and also some ideas of how do we identify whether a thing is ready for handover actually. It was quite simple.
Love it. So one product concept I know that you're a pretty big fan of is the ideal customer profile. And everybody, just based on the name, they may say, okay, I get it. It's ideal customer profile. It's kind of like maybe like a persona you care about, or just defining the jobs to be done. But I think it's a slightly more powerful framework. And can you help us understand why?
Yeah, absolutely. I became a super big fan of ICPs latest during my tenure at Doodle. And I may be somewhat opinionated on that and influenced by my own experiences again. I think that applies to everyone in product, actually. But I've seen all three concepts in action. I've seen the persona, the ICP, and also the jobs to be done. One example is from PayPal, where we were required to work with personas, and those personas were created by the marketing department. What happened is that we had like life-sized cardboard personas all over the office, right? And we received training and presentations on the concept of the personas. And then we were kind of expected to draw our product decisions based on, I don't know, Peter, 35 years, owner of a sock shop who lives in Germany on the beach, right? And I was like, yeah, that's nice, but what does it tell me about the product decision? Like nothing. So it was so hard to relate to those personas. And in the end, actually, it was super funny to have the cardboard personas in the office, and they were great for our codes, right? But they didn't really serve any other need. In contrast, though, in my previous role, we worked with ideal customer profile. And I learned that when done right, it drives a lot of organizational alignment, and it is way more data-informed framework than personas is, because it's not just like hypothetical kind of people that you try to build your product for, but it is really driven by data. What we've done is we've done an intake survey, so we can kind of cluster, classical clustering. We can cluster the roles. We have done that at Contentful as well. And then once you have had your ideal customer profiles, or like at least the profiles of all the users that onboard to your product, you are also able to tie back that information to their activation rate, their retention rate, their conversion rate. And that gives you such a clear idea of the ideal customer profile that has the highest retention, highest activation, highest conversion, like those who already perform within your current product better than all other clients using the same product. And that tells you something, right? There must be something in your product that is so appealing to that one segment of users that if you just double down a little bit on that, whether it's marketing or whether it's building features for them, you can actually grow your business, right? And what we've done then is we added another layer, which is the jobs to be done. Because if you do have an idea of that one ideal customer profile, and you also have an idea of like, what are they even trying to solve in their everyday life, and how can your product help them solving that faster? That helps you making decisions on the features you want to build, the sales material you want to create, the value proposition you want to show on your website. So it creates alignment between various teams. And I would say overall, there is the ideal customer profile, which is the overarching framework. There is the persona, which are like you can have 5 different personas. And if you need to know whether Peter has a sock shop or Petra has, I don't know, an internet store, then that's nice, but I don't necessarily need it. And then there is the jobs to be done, which is partially integrated into personas, but can enhance the ICP framework a lot. And to me personally, the combination of ideal customer profile and jobs to be done is super powerful, because you can focus all of your company's efforts towards 1 or 2, maybe 3 different personas. And then you can really make sure that you grow faster than you would grow as if you just try to satisfy everyone who is onboarding to your product.
It's so funny that you mentioned the cardboard cutouts. Because first of all, I was that person who created those cardboard cutouts because I was so excited about personas 10 years ago. But I have experienced the exact same thing. I was so excited about personas. I rolled them out to my companies. But I found that especially the product teams, but even your marketing teams, even your customer success teams, various teams, when it comes to actually doing the work, it can be quite a bit harder. And what I loved about Ideal Customer Profile, and I take no credit for this, this was all done by the CEO, Tim, and the VP of Product, Christian, at Apollo.io, is they would only look at the data for the Ideal Customer Profile. Weekly business review, quarter business review. Like, you're like, oh, but I thought our company's revenue is 70 million ARR, but they're talking about 50 million. What are they talking about? Oh, they're talking about ideal customer profile. And I thought our company growth rate was 70, but they're saying it's 100. Oh, they're only talking about ideal customer profile. So one of the powers of this is that the data team can take it, different teams can take it, and they can just focus on that.
Exactly. Yeah, and that is super magic because it steers completely different discussions suddenly. Personas might be a rather still like a marketing thing, I assume. I haven't seen too many product teams acquiring or using personas to a good extent. But I've seen teams using ideal customer profiles in combination with jobs to be done across various teams. And I've seen that the alignment on this clarity is much bigger than it has been with personas because of what you just said, because it's based on data and you can actually measure its impact on a day-to-day basis. If I change the value proposition on my website, does my conversion go up? If I build a feature just for that one specific target group, is my retention going up? You can measure that. How do I want to measure if Silke's sock shop is performing better just because I delivered a feature? It doesn't stick with me at all.
Yep. So sort of the last thing on PM Craft I want to talk about, and this is another one that I think people may have heard of, but they may not be using to its full potential, which is assumption and story mapping. And in our pre-podcast prep, you mentioned you help a lot of teams with this. Why are those techniques so powerful?
Yeah. I always describe it as like if you're a new parent, and I think you also became a new parent a couple of months now ago, right? If you're a new parent, your baby is the most beautiful baby in the world. And others might look at it like, yeah, it's a baby, right? But for you, it's like it's the best thing you've ever seen. And I feel like same happens to product people with their products. They have an idea, and this idea is so brilliant, they just fall in love with it. And for some reasons, they forget about like all the underlying assumptions because they just don't see it. Others might look at it and say like, yeah, but that's risky. I'm not super convinced. But the product person is like, yeah, but I love it. It's amazing. It's like we need to build that. Assumption mapping helps with that because if done well, but you need external people from outside of your team to do a good assumption mapping. But if done well, you can really identify those things that might kill your business idea or your feature idea. And that's why I think like thinking about the riskiest assumptions and mapping them out and doing some speedy experiments in order to de-risk to a certain extent is just a super powerful team. If, again, you're not overcomplicating things and you're not trying to do a 20-week research and like talking to 5,000 users and running 20 A/B tests, but you're trying to figure out the bare minimum experiment you can run, that helps you to really de-risk things before you invest into your most important and most expensive capacity, which is the engineering team. So if I would want to decide whether I invest like $1 million into a 7-people engineering team or more, or if I want to invest 2 weeks into running like 20 experiments to de-risk my riskiest assumptions, guess what? I would always choose the 2-week investment first. And that's why I love assumption map.
Right?
Yeah.
We're always like, we might have handed you a 6-month project, but please go chunk this up. Figure out what the risky assumptions are. Ideally, figure out the riskiest one. And that risky one, let's execute something fast, like 2 weeks or less, that we can get some information on to de-risk.
Exactly, but then they get lost and they feel like, oh, it's not de-risked enough. We need more research, more experiments. And then there's no one in the room accountable to say like, stop, we do have enough. It's fine. We're good to take that risk now. And I think that's why assumption mapping and also product discovery is a little bit of a burnt thing, because we feel like we're just over-investing in research and discovery and assumption maps and all the tools actually, because it takes too much time. But I think if you find the right balance between just de-risking enough, but also being willing to still take some risk, then it's a super, super cool tool.
All right. So that's the craft of product management. I want to move on to your hot takes about product management. And there are so many of them that it was hard for me to pick a few, but you've said that I believe that growth PM eats traditional PM for breakfast. And even as a former growth product leader, as someone who writes product growth and would love this to be true because it'd be great for my business, I remain a tad bit skeptical because I tend to think that core product is really like where the money is made, and probably some teams introduce growth product even too early, and that growth product is kind of an enhancer to core product. So tell me why I'm wrong, or tell me the nuance in your statement that I didn't understand.
So I think you're not wrong, right? Like, yes, growth is just right now a fraction of product management landscape, and it's not, product management is not growth. So what I see is, and I also wrote a LinkedIn post about that, but I feel like product management is facing a reputation issue right now. So we often draft like impressive visions and we create elaborate roadmaps, and then due to complexity and dependencies, delivering results takes just way too long, right? And then when we finally release something, we frequently find out that we kind of overestimated its impact. But, well, you know what? We product people, we just move on quickly to the next shiny item without much reflection, right? And that might not be true for every company out there in the world, but I've seen that like this jumping to the next shiny thing is a thing. And that is something where I feel like product has a reputation issue. In contrast, growth teams with their data-driven approach and their focus on optimizing product market fit and user retention, they demonstrate so much value so fast that actually I feel they just excel in hypothesis-driven development. They break down large hypotheses into small testable assumptions and they iterate quickly. So given today's economic constraints, and that might change in the future, but right now we do have economic constraints, which team do you think is more appealing to a CEO? The team that is kind of promising the like wonderful things and shiny things that will deliver millions of value? Or the team that runs a 2-week experiment and like proves a conversion rate improvement of 3%, right? I fear that right now it is rather the latter. And what I mean by growth is eating product, I mean that I think there are two things that might happen. Either growth people learn also the fundamentals of product, so they keep their like mindset of iterating fast, a thing that we as product people always promise but never deliver. They do that, right? That's what it is. So either growth people just adopt this like, okay, we need a vision and we need a strategy and we also need to focus a little bit on innovation and like feature enhancement and grow and beyond growth. But if they keep the mindset of iterating rapidly, of hypothesis, of de-risking, of data-informed decision-making, I'm sure that you will see more hires that have growth background than you will see hires that have traditional PM background. The alternative path is that PM people learn to not only promise things, but to also really deliver and to hold themselves accountable and to prove with data that they can deliver and that they can deliver much faster than like 6, 7, 8, 9 months. That's just too long. So I think one of both things might happen, but potentially the roles might merge into one role again.
Got it. Yeah, I definitely feel like all core PMs everywhere need to learn that growth skill set. I think that it's kind of like all PMs are needing to become growth PMs. And I saw this probably most in that period of layoffs that we all had a year and a half ago, where you needed to deliver in-quarter results. So we couldn't wait for in-year results.
Yeah, exactly. And we're constrained so much. If we do have that one feature and we're operating in a system that is a couple of years old, then there is tech debt, then there is your CTO that says like, oh, we should build that from scratch, so it takes a little bit more time. So you're operating with so much constraints as a product team, and you're not questioning whether there are 10 different ways to do the same thing but faster, but you're just like, ah, yeah, that's what it is. It takes long, right? But a growth team is like, oh, that's okay that it takes time, but let us figure out if there are 10 different ways of achieving the same thing. And I think that circles back to what we discussed earlier. I would really recommend product managers to adopt that mindset of like, yeah, that's good that you think it takes long, but what are 10 different ways of making it faster? And how can we measure and prove successfully that we deliver what we promise?
And that'll be a huge savor for all you anxious PMs out there about job security still, because I think if you're consistently showing those types of short and long-term results, leaders, they need to keep you around because the results are happening.
Absolutely. Or preferably, you're at least able to also label the things you're doing, right? So it's fine to work on features, and everyone knows it takes longer. It's fine to work on innovation, and yes, it takes longer than a growth experiment. But if I can tell my CEO that, like, look, this quarter we're investing into enhancing features, so you will see us delivering just 1 or 2 new features, but we are confident that this is going through the roof, that's fine as well. Or you can say, like, this quarter, we think we need to really drive revenue. So this quarter is all about experimentation, but we promise we're going to run 120 experiments and we're going to increase subscription rate only, nothing else, right? I think that's what you need to do as a product person. You need to play both the long term, the short term, the innovation, but also the enhancement of existing product.
The future of marketing is word of mouth. Turn your users and partners into your most valuable growth channel with podcast partner Cello. Cello is the only all-in-one solution to engage your most passionate users and partners to refer your product with just a few clicks. Best of all, Cello is directly embedded into your product and handles everything from referral payments to tax and compliance. And it runs on autopilot, so you can focus on scaling and building your own product. Here's how it works. First, within just a few hours, Cello integrates with your product and existing tools to automate all manual work. In your dashboard, you can then set up your referral campaign, define the reward details, and make the referral experience your own. After the program goes live, Cello continuously analyzes and scales its performance based on AI-generated recommendations. Plus, you only pay for successful. Go give it a try for free and learn more about user-led growth at cello.so/productgrowth.
Another hot take that you have that I tend to agree with a lot is everything I read on LinkedIn is repeating how I've learned PM for over a decade now. And I feel this way. I feel like, what did the last original PM thought end with Marty Kagan and Inspired in 2008? Like, what happened? So why do you think that is?
I have no idea. Really, I have no idea. Maybe it is because we added so much more complexity into that role that we do have no time to reinvent ourselves. But yeah, I mean, I now see a lot of discussions around PRDs popping up all over LinkedIn. And I'm like, oh my gosh, PRDs. I wrote PRDs at PayPal. I wrote about that as well. A 72 pages long PRD that was the standard at PayPal back then. Yes, it's cool to think through it from beginning to end, right? It's nice, but actually that's so waterfall. And now you're telling me PRDs are the hottest thing in product right now? Like, no, don't get me started again. And I wonder, there's so much evolution in departments like customer service, for example, right? Like, they just revolutionized themselves. They use AI to automate their tasks. They figure out, like, what can robots do? What can we do? What are the things that we can focus on that, like, no one else can? But in product, I always feel like we tend to think only humans can do the job, and we just have to repeat the same things over and over again. And I would just love to see a time where we have an idea of the things that we can kind of hand over to, like, an automism or like a process, like an automated process, whatever, right? Like, I don't know what it is. But I think we need to stop to think that, like, PMing is like so unique that we can't automate things, or that we can't even remove certain things from the PM role at all because it's absolutely necessary. We should learn from other departments like sales or service departments that are currently just reinventing themselves. I feel like we don't.
So this is the most vague question out of the whole interview, but what are those directions? Like, if you're for future casting, like, how does the product management field need to reinvent itself?
Yeah, I think I spoke a little bit about it. I think it's things like, if you're a product manager today, explore tasks that can be automated, right? Don't just like talk a little bit to ChatGPT. Try to figure out how to reinvent your process and how you can automate things. It must be possible. If there's no tool for it, build it, right? There must be something. Also, like, look for methods to enhance speed and efficiency while delivering. Like, just because you've done something for 10 years exactly the same way, it doesn't mean we have to do it over and over again. We can question how we deliver things. And like I have no concrete answer. And as you said, it's a super fluffy question. But if we would even just start to question whether the way we do PM today is still the most modern ways of doing product and the still most efficient way of doing product, given the technological environment we're in, I think that would be a good starting point.
Great way to end the serious talk. So are you ready to move on to the lightning round?
Let's do it.
All right. What's your favorite hobby?
Biking. I don't know if you can see it.
Oh, that's a serious road bike.
It's a serious gravel bike, yeah.
I hope you haven't been hit by a car.
Not yet.
Okay. I was into road biking for about 5 years, and it was like the second time I got hit by a car that I had to quit.
Oh my gosh. No, I drive usually early in the morning or late in the evening in the mountains. I'm in Switzerland, so there is always a road. So it's lovely.
Nice. I think Europe is also more conscious of bikers as a whole.
I think so too. Especially Switzerland is.
Awesome. What's something very few people know about you?
Yeah, I prefer to stay behind the stage. Like everyone thinks because I'm so active on LinkedIn and like you see me more or less every day, everyone thinks I'm a super outgoing person while I'm not, right? I even had to convince myself to do podcasting. That was my personal growth goal like 1 or 2 years ago. I think you're the 5th podcast meanwhile, so I'm getting used to it, but I'm a behind the stage person.
I think a lot of people are actually who are content creators. It's counterintuitive, but all right.
We can hide behind words, huh?
Yeah. What's your favorite interview question of PM candidates?
Why are you the perfect hire for me or for us as a company? The one minute pitch.
I like it. So if somebody goes on 5 minutes, that's not the right way.
No, potentially not. It's the last question I ask, and usually I also learn to potentially prepare candidates for that question. So I ask the recruiter to tell them that this question will come up, because otherwise it can be quite a surprise. But having an answer and like a 60-second pitch for that question, that is something that I find super appealing, actually.
I love people who can do that. What's your favorite product or growth book?
I recently read Build the Right It by Alberto Savoia. It was an absolute surprise because the methodology he describes is not super new, but the way he described it in a super short book was so approachable that I immediately turned it into a training for the teams I'm currently coaching in my current job. Just because the methodology is like so eye-opening that even non-product people can learn how to build and de-risk something super fast.
Cool. What's a newsletter you've been reading?
Strategy Breakdown. I hated strategy myself. I had a fear of strategy myself, and I learned to fall in love with strategy. The Strategy Breakdown newsletter is just brilliant, and I have no clue how the content creator comes up with all these great newsletters every single week, but it's amazing and I highly recommend it.
And he is probably the original Akash fan. Just for everybody listening, he commented on my LinkedIn posts when nobody commented. Shout out Alex Alder. What's a new product you've started using and enjoy?
Buffer. Content creator, I need to automate my processes as well. So Buffer is just brilliant because I can drop all my ideas and it fine-tune it over the weekend, and then the posts go live without needing me.
That's something as a workaholic I need to get over. I'm on 7 days a week on posting myself. So
don't do it. Schedule it.
Yeah. What product feature or product are you most proud of shipping?
Yeah, we've built a product called Sign-Up Sheets at Doodle, and I absolutely love it because it was the first time that I've built a greenfield product in a very successful company. And it was just super aligned with the key value proposition, and it allowed us to double down. And I think the team has done a brilliant job here.
Awesome. What commonly held belief or saying do you disagree with?
We talked about it. We have tried this already. It didn't work. Come on, stop it.
And it's very prevalent. Common would probably be an understatement for that one. What's one particularly memorable product failure that you learned from?
Yeah, I think I didn't eat my own dog food, and I've built a product for over 9 months without having enough evidence, actually. I fell in love with the product myself. I felt like we've done our research, fair share, like we can do it. Now, in retrospective, I would say I have 20 ideas of how to test the riskiest assumption of that product way faster with the existing product instead of just trying to build the new thing right away for 9 months. Yeah, huge learning. Eat my own dog food.
I've made that same mistake. I probably made it 2 or 3 times, so it's a bad one.
Same. Well, we're product people, huh? We fall in love with the ugly baby.
Yeah, I once tried to make budgeting happen at a firm. You still don't see that there, so. All right. Where can people find you online?
LinkedIn.
All right. And how can listeners help you?
Commenting on my posts. I absolutely love that. I sometimes have a very specific perspective on things. I love all comments, good or bad, because the feedback I get from my followers is that they also love the discussions in my comment section. They really read through it, reach out to me and say like, that was such a helpful post, not because of the post, hopefully also a little bit because of the post, but because of the comments. And I think I love that because that's kind of a community driven training for my followers. And also please comment, even if you disagree with me, just comment. I love that.
That's what I love about your content, which is that it's not a one-way distribution. It's actually a two-way dialogue. So I hope everybody joins Stephanie in the LinkedIn comments section. Stephanie, thank you for being here.
Oh, thanks for having me. That was such an excellent podcast. I loved your preparation and all the questions because that sparked quite a lot of thought moments for me. That was brilliant. Thanks a lot.
Oh, you're too kind. Thank you. See ya.
Thanks. Ciao.
Thank you so much for listening. If you found this valuable, you can subscribe to the show on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or your favorite podcast app. Also, please consider giving us a rating or leaving a review, as that really helps other listeners find out about the podcast. You can find all the past episodes or learn more about the show at product-growth.com. See you in the next episode.